Let's wait just one. So I guess we all got to say got it. Okay, I'm going to wait just one more minute and then we'll plunge in. Looks like we've got 33 people so far. Okay, well, just in the interest of time, I'm going to launch us in. My name is Paul Leistner. I'm with the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association, and I'll be facilitating our Southeast Safety Forum this evening. So this event is co-hosted by the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association and the Western Seminary, which is in a wonderful resident in our neighborhood, the Western Seminary. And as co-host, Bonnie Ekholm is the gifts officer for the Western Seminary. And as co-host, would you like to make some introductory or welcoming remarks? Go ahead.
Thank you, Paul. I'm Bonnie Ekholm, and Sean Gordon is also at Western Seminary, and the two of us would really like to welcome you on behalf of Western and to thank you for inviting us to be a part of this important evening. And I want to thank all of you for spending your time this evening with us. And special thank you to Midge and Paul and Laura and my buddy Sean. So thank you all.
Thanks, Bonnie, for your support. And again, you know, us all in our neighborhood, understanding who's here and who we all are and how we can partner together. This is a wonderful example of modeling that. You know, if we all work together, we can accomplish things. And so Sean is going to be helping us with the tech stuff and keeping us going and hopefully fixing any problems if they arise. So why are we holding this forum? Community safety is a growing citywide problem. Many neighborhoods and communities in Portland have been struggling with the issues for many years. And many are experiencing, like ours, are experiencing recent increases in safety concerns. Just in the conversation we've been having before the meeting, people are listing all sorts of things that have happened that just didn't happen in the past here. Recent incidents like the arson at Western Seminary, shootings in the neighborhood, the carjacking that we were just hearing about near Mount Tabor Middle School, where they had to lock down the school. Things are happening that just weren't happening here in the past. And while we recognize that this is very disturbing for our neighborhood, we also recognize that other neighborhoods in the city have been experiencing things like this for years, and in many cases, and much more severely. And so I think it's important for us to recognize that these are citywide problems and they require citywide solutions. So the fact that more of us are starting to wake up to what's happening, I think also increases the ability for us to have some political voice in actually getting something to happen by joining with other communities, other neighborhoods in Portland. So it's going to take all of us across the city working together to address these difficult and challenging issues. During our 2 hours together, we're going to focus on learning about resources and strategies to help us advocate for action on our concerns about safety and help us improve safety in our neighborhood, but also citywide. Portland has a long, wonderful history of community engagement, and I think community members really have made Portland the wonderful city it is, and I think community members' involvement also will help engage in this and also help move us forward to a positive solution. And Roger Jones is here with the Hawthorne Boulevard Business Association, longtime community leader. And Roger, you just wanted to recognize Bud Clark, former Mayor Bud Clark, who passed recently. Why don't you go ahead?
We have an opportunity to look back, and those of us that have been around too long, I consider myself one of the too longers that's been around, should remember that our citizen mayor has died in the very, very recent past, and we are yet to have memorial a good sending off. If I could do it, I'd have another mayor's ball, but that's not going to happen. I will always remember Bud as the consummate citizen person who brought neighborhood associations and the actual ability to do good in our neighborhoods to the people. And it's people like her on this phone call tonight that are going to make the difference in our future. And I just like a moment of silence for Bud. It's the least we can do. I think he's with us as we progress. Thank you, Paul, for the opportunity to recognize him.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And I think just for all of us here to recognize, we're going to have the 50th anniversary of the neighborhood system, the community and neighborhood engagement system in Portland is coming up in just a couple of years. It was 1974 when it was all first formally created here, and people have come from all over the world to study and look at what we've done here in Portland. And there have been ups and downs in community engagement over those 50 years. And I think we sort of have reached a little bit of a down right now, but I think there's a lot of interest in a resurgence and re-engaging the community as a partner with the city to actually take on and solve some of the problems we all face together. So when government and community work as actual partners together, that's when we get things done. So this forum tonight is part of that effort to sort of re-engage us all with this decision-making. So the agenda for this evening, we're going to hear from two presenters, and then we're going to have a panel of speakers that are going to be addressing they're going to share information and respond to your questions. We'll try to end right at 9. So our two presenters include Jenni Pullen. She's the lead staff person with the City of Portland Office of Community and Civic Life, the Community Safety Program. Jenni's going to talk about the resources her program has available to support community members, what happened to the Neighborhood Watch system, or program that was around for a long time, and then how you all as community members can access tools and strategies to increase safety in your home, in your business, and in your neighborhood. Our second speaker is advocacy trainer Leticia Kleinberg. In early February, Leticia co-hosted a safety advocacy forum that was over 60 Mount Tabor residents participated in the forum. And it was about how to address increasing incidents of crime. And in Leticia's invitation to the forum, she sort of made a very powerful statement at that time. This was in early February. She said, on Friday morning, a shooting at Southeast 58th and Stark sent 27 bullets into our neighbors' cars and homes. This was in addition to a high-speed crash into a building at 55th and Belmont, a carjacking at 60th and Belmont, and a shooting at 52nd and Cooch. And then she went on to say, as I typed this at around 9 p.m. on Sunday, I heard more gunshots, and a neighbor just verified they found more shell casings on the sidewalk at 60th and Taylor. This is truly a crisis that requires our swift action. And again, we also know about the arson that happened at that Western Seminary, which was a very scary thing. There's been a lot of stuff happening in our neighborhood that just hasn't happened before. So Leticia is going to share information that she gleaned with her co-facilitator, Kate Merrill, who trains stakeholders in the Central East Side on how to access public services, how to provide solution-based testimony to officials, and specific points of influence on government budgets. So our panel, if I see Brian Ossenkopf is here, we're going to have, he's the assistant chief with the Portland Police, and East Precinct Commander Erica Hurley are going to be on our panel, as our staff from Commissioner Dan Ryan's office, Mark Bond, Commissioner Ryan's policy advisor, and Darian Jones, constituent relations coordinator and policy advisor. You guys as a panel, you're going to be in a panel, and we'll give you a chance to introduce yourselves and then make some introductory remarks, and then we'll have you field questions from the audience. And we also want to acknowledge, I don't know, Ricardo, are you here from Commissioner Rubio's office?
I sure am, Paul. Hi.
Okay, great. So Ricardo Lujan Valerio is here with us. And Ricardo, you can be part of the panel if you want, whatever you're comfortable with.
Thank you, Paul. I'll be here to listen, and if I can chime in or need to chime in, I'll make sure to do so.
Perfect. Okay. And do we have anybody from any of the other commissioners' offices right now? Okay, if any of them join us, we want to recognize them. But Ricardo, we're very grateful to have you here.
Paul, if I can interrupt and just relay a message to Sean, I'm hearing from some people who can't get on. So I'm trying to figure out why there might be a problem. Sean, if you're out there, if you can hear me, because I'm getting messages from people who can't get on.
If you can get a specific message from them, I can look at that. I'm opening up the panel so I can see if anybody's getting denied right now.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Again, Sean with the Western Seminary is helping us with the tech support for this Zoom event. So we recognize that many of us feel very strongly about what's happening. It's scary, it's angering, it's frightening. We ask tonight that you all treat each other with, and our speakers, with respect, express your opinions while focusing on the issues and not attacking anyone personally. We're really trying to make this a constructive discussion about how we move forward. So as we move forward with the speakers, we're initially going to mute everybody but the speakers. And Laura Orr, who's here, is going to be helping us. So we encourage you all to put your comments and your questions in the chat. Laura is going to be monitoring the chat throughout this evening and then sort of feeding us questions that you guys share in the chat. So we're going to take that approach and see how that works. We're also recording the meeting, or Sean is from Western Seminary, and then we'll figure out a way to get that recording posted so you guys can see it again if you need to, or anybody who's not able to be here will also have access to that. And I think look for information about that on the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association website, mttaborpdx.org, or just Google Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association and find it. So Sean, we just want to make sure that Jenni and Leticia are unmuted, and let's mute everybody else except Laura.
Jenni and Leticia are co-hosts, so they should be able to unmute themselves.
Oh, okay. And we're going to start with Jenni. And I worked with Jenni for many years when I worked for the Office of Neighborhood Involvement and then the Office of Community and Civic Life. So Jenni, we're very grateful to have you here, and we will turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. I do have a small presentation to give, but I thought I would start with a brief introduction about who I am and how long I've been with the city. And then I'll address the question about the Neighborhood Watch program just right out of the gates. And if there are further questions as we go, I'm happy to answer those. So I'm Jenni Pullen. I've been with the City of Portland's Crime Prevention Program, which is now the Community Safety Program, going on my 15th year now. I have a background in criminology and criminal justice from Portland State University, and I have volunteer experience in my areas of passion, which is in personal safety. I've been a volunteer with the Portland Police Bureau's strength programs for years. I've also been a rape victim advocate under Rod Underhill's office. And I'm just very passionate about safety and providing people with the tools to keep themselves and others safe and our greater communities safe. So I'm very happy to be in this work. So the Neighborhood Watch program is a program that our office used to facilitate. We used to provide Neighborhood Watch trainings. And I imagine some of you in this forum tonight have sat in a living room in your neighborhood with one of our coordinators to receive a Neighborhood Watch training at some point in time throughout the years. There are many great things about coming together as a Neighborhood Watch or as a community group. And those trainings personally, for me to get them, were very rewarding. And I know neighbors got a lot out of them. However, a few years ago, our program took a closer look at the traditional Neighborhood Watch model. And we determined that it had a focus on watching and reporting people suspicious people and suspicious activity without considering our own biases, right? We never talked about that. We were leaving some really important information out, tools that we should all have if we're going to really have a holistic training in how to come together as a community and watch out for each other and stay safe. We also determined that a neighborhood watch sign is not what keeps a neighborhood safe. And I think everyone here knows that. It's knowing your neighbors. When you know your neighbor, you're more likely to care about your neighbor, and you're more likely to look out and pay attention to your neighbors. So what we did is we redesigned our program, and it is what is now called Neighbors Together. And I will be teaching or talking about that in my presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And just so that you know, at the end, I am going to be putting information in the chat that includes contact information, how to request services, and also some additional information that might be of interest after I'm done presenting. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Just bear with me for one moment. All right, and Paul, are you seeing a screen that says Community Safety Program?
Yes, I am. Successful.
Very
Good.
good. I do a lot of Zoom trainings these days, so it should go without any issues, but we'll see. I'll do my best.
We're all getting better at it.
We are just in time to start going back to in-person work, right?
Right.
Which we're very eager to do. So again, thank you for sharing your time tonight so that I can tell you about our community safety program today, who we are, and the services that we offer. And you know, the program is really focused on promoting safer communities in 3 different ways: through our trainings, creating safer spaces, and community building and place making. We strive to provide options for reducing vulnerability to our personal safety and to the safety where we live, where we work, where we learn, and where we play. We can't do any of this without first introducing you to the team. So today, our team looks a lot different than it did when I started in this work 15 years ago. At our peak, we had 12 coordinators serving the city of Portland. Now today, if you look at this screen, it appears that we have, 7 people, and we're actually smaller than this now. We have Sandra Lefrancois, who is our partnerships coordinator, and she's actually working on some other bureau projects right now. So she's not really part of our team at the moment. And then we have 3 teams. We have the North team, Danielle Franco Nunez and Jacob Brostoff. We have the East team, Mary Tompkins and Stacy Vu. And Stacy just recently took a new position. So we have a vacancy in East. And then we have our Central team, myself and my teammate, Sarah Berkemeyer. Needless to say, we are all working together to serve our neighbors in East with their training and service requests. Together, our team has almost 50 years of experience in community safety and crime prevention. We also bring a lot of experience in other areas. We have a former city planner. We have equity work, conflict resolution experience, violence prevention, social work, personal safety, and more. So there is a wide variety of professional and personal experience that makes our team pretty unique in serving the city. I want to start by acknowledging that safety means different things to different people based on our lived experiences and the many different social determinants that can contribute to feelings of safety. What feels safe to me may not feel safe to my neighbor. And it's really important that we recognize that and that we understand that when we're talking about safety. If you look at this starburst design, each of these categories contributes to keeping communities safe. Now, while our work in community safety will always overlap with each category in some way, the core of our services is found in the top 3: social and mental health, community, culture and education, and personal safety. I want to start by telling you about our training program as it stands today. We are really working to provide robust trainings that are relevant to what people are experiencing today in relation to safety. So our trainings are currently available in Spanish and English through our staff, and then we do have language services available so that we can meet the needs of all Portlanders. Currently, our most requested trainings are Neighbors Together, which is that kind of new version of Neighborhood Watch, if you will, and our personal safety workshops. And we also cover other topics, and we develop trainings that are relevant. So during the beginning of the pandemic, we created a training about social isolation. You know, we were just doing the best we could in that moment to provide something relevant. Sometimes people joined us because they were feeling isolated, and others really just wanted to come up with ideas and learn about ways to connect with the community during a really difficult time. So we will always continue to explore new training topics. I can tell you right now, one that we're exploring is gun violence, right? We need to make sure that we're incredibly thoughtful and resourceful in developing that. So that is something that our team is looking into. So here we go. Here you are looking at a picture of Mary and Stacy holding a Neighbors Together training in someone's living room. Neighbors Together. So I touched on that in the beginning. It's a 1-hour training where neighbors get to know one another and learn about public safety resources and programs. We begin by setting ground rules to create a safe space for neighbors to share, talk about their concerns, introduce themselves. And then there's this discussion on implicit bias, which we all have. And we provide some tools on ways to explore what those are for you personally and how to kind of weed those out so that when you are in a time of crisis or emergency and you're following your intuition about a situation, it's not getting clouded by bias. We are not only discussing when to call public safety resources like 911, but we also cover a number of other appropriate resources that are available for problem solving. The key to Neighbors Together, much like Neighborhood Watch, is that everyone in that group has access to and a good understanding of the resources that are available, and that they're all on the same page about when to use them and how to use them. And I think I heard someone say earlier something about the importance of reporting. You know, even if you feel that maybe you aren't going to get a police response for one reason or another, it's so important that you do still report, because that shows that it's happening, right? It creates a record that that has happened, that there is an issue. The police bureau is very data driven, and I'm sure that our police partners will speak more to that this evening. But we certainly do encourage folks to report crime to the police. But there are some other ways that you can problem solve issues that you have going on in your neighborhood. And then oftentimes Neighbors Together trainings lead to further community building activities. Some groups continue to meet on a regular basis. They decide to have a block party or create some sort of placemaking activity in their neighborhood. All right, so the next training that I want to talk about is probably our most, well, it's really in demand for myself and for Sarah. We serve the central area. So we've got everything on the west side and inner east side. And we are very busy with personal safety workshops. We have worked with a lot of businesses that have staff that are not feeling safe coming into work. So we've been providing personal safety workshops, but we do provide these citywide for any community group or business. The workshop curriculum is a collaboration with the Portland Police Bureau's strength programs, and I'll put a link to their program in the chat when I'm done here. This is a 2-hour workshop. It provides a trauma-informed, safe space to learn options for keeping yourself and others safe. It's an interactive workshop. It builds on the foundation of understanding and listening to our true intuition, clearing the way of our implicit biases. It provides tools on how to become comfortable with being assertive And I used to cringe when I thought about, oh, being assertive, but with some practice, you can really become comfortable with it. And it's a really great way to communicate with folks. We covered de-escalation skills, which people are asking us for. You know, how do I help someone who's escalated, who's maybe impaired or in a mental health crisis? So we talk about that. How to identify why someone might be escalated. But what happens if we can't de-escalate? If we can't help them calm down and help them? What if it becomes unsafe? Well, then we cover options for escape. How do you get out of there and stay safe? And we also talk about what we call upstander intervention. And this specifically talks about how to support others in the community who may be targeted for who they are authentically. Some of us can conceal our authentic selves when we go out into the world, and others cannot due to religious expression or race. And we need to be upstanders for others. And there are ways that everyone can do that they're comfortable with. We're not asking for people to be heroes here, but we are asking folks to think about what's a way that you could be an upstander for someone that feels comfortable to you. All right, so those are personal safety workshops. It's worth noting that this is not gender specific to the audience, so anyone can take it, and you can be 14 and up. If you're 14, it's nice for you to have a grown-up with you. Let's talk about creating safer spaces. Now, our team has experience and certification in the practice of crime prevention through environmental design. What that means is that we conduct security assessments of properties, and some of you in this session may have had us do that for you in the past. We work with private and public spaces, so homes, apartment buildings, mixed-use buildings, businesses, schools, you name it, even natural spaces like parks. We also advise on plans for multifamily housing developments. We've advised on capital improvement projects such as the earthquake-ready Burnside Bridge redesign and the Mount Scott Community Center renovation. So here's what a typical assessment looks like. If you were to reach out to us and say, I'd really like to get one of those security assessments for my home. You'd have a coordinator who works in your area come out and meet with you and walk the property. We would schedule probably a half hour to an hour. While we walk the property with you, we're going to learn about the space and how it's used and what the concerns are. We'll take some photos and we'll make some notes, and we'll discuss with you the principles of crime prevention through environmental design. You know, visibility, we're going to look at, is there good visibility across the space, or does it feel really isolated? Who's gaining access to the property? How are they gaining access? And is it really clear where public space transitions to private space? What's being done to bring positive activity into that space? And it's just as important, if not most important, that you're maintaining lights, vegetation, locks on your doors, all of those things. So we discuss ways to implement placemaking in and around the space as well. So, if you live in an area where maybe there's some open public space that isn't being utilized or it's being misused, we can help you with some creative ideas on how to activate that space with positive activity. All right, so here's our approach. We're going to look at this from the standpoint of what can you do now that doesn't cost you anything. Then we'll add some layers to that. So we're not going to swoop in and tell you you need to install an expensive camera system or hire a security guard. We're going to start with what you can do now. And it might be as simple as installing an eye viewer in a door, for example. But it does help to have a fresh set of eyes on your space. So what happens after we're done walking the property with you? Well, you're going to receive a written report with photos for reference and specific recommendations and resources. So there won't be any surprises. There'll be things in there that we've discussed, and you'll have that document for your own use. Some properties find it helpful because they may not be the decision makers when it comes to paying for and implementing improvements on their property. But you can do whatever you want. We'll call you in about 3 months and ask, how did it go? And if you chose to not make any improvements, we're curious to know, were there barriers to doing so? Or did you just decide, maybe it's not a priority right now? Now, if CPTED, or crime prevention through environmental design, is of particular interest to you, you can take a deeper dive into it through our CPTED training that we provide. It's a 1.5 hour training that is going to share some examples of places in Portland where we have made recommendations and those changes were implemented. We have some before and after photos, and it's a really fun training. Right now, we're providing this training on a regular basis for the downtown clean and safe area, and it's available to anyone. So if you have a community group that would like that training, please reach out to us. And then last, I want to talk about community building. So community building and placemaking. I mean, I think that everyone who's here tonight has an interest in this just by nature of being here and wanting to learn more. What this does is it includes community-led activities such as block parties and placemaking projects. Some of you may have held a National Night Out Against Crime block party the first Tuesday in August in years past. So our program is supporting block parties year-round for any reason, whether it's National Night Out or something else. We're here to help. If you're interested in street closure or how to get started with organizing a block party, we're happy to help with that. Just a note for folks who are familiar with our past services, we used to be a formal sponsor, if you will, of National Night Out. We would actually register your party. We would connect you with public safety, fire and police and whatnot throughout the city. And we no longer do that. And the truth is, you don't need us to do that. You can still host a National Night Out block party, but we just don't formally take on that registration piece any longer. But we are more than happy to attend, as we used to, provide trainings if you'd like at your block party. And let's take a look here, placemaking projects. So this is really, right now, our current focus is on supporting community trash cleanups. If there's an area that gets hit with bulky waste, illegal dumping, or trash, we really want to help support efforts to do cleanups. You'll see on this slide, there is a flyer here, Portland Trash Cleanup Resources. I can make sure to, not sure how to make that accessible to everybody. I'll figure that out. That's a new flyer and it's really great. But we also want to help with placemaking. So what happens when you clear an area that's had a ton of dumping and you've cleaned it up? Let's bring in let's activate that with some positive activity, a cultural event, or something that is really the stark opposite, right? And let's activate that space. And that's where our program can help you. We can help come up with some ideas. In some cases, we might be able to help fund some of those placemaking initiatives. So if you have some ideas in that regard, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll see if we can come up with some support for you. All right. And then I just want to note that while we are focusing on those 3 categories, our program will continue to offer services and events that are led by our program. So drug turn-in events, those were on hold during the pandemic. I'd like to see those come back so folks can have free prescription drug disposal. Maybe this fall is my hope. Gun turn-in events, resource fairs. We've been participating in Fix-It Fair and Sunday Parkways. And we also are working on our connection with youth through community safety. So in the past, we have had programs with Ron Russell Middle School through the SUN programs, and we're looking forward to doing more of that as we are able to, as we transition into in-person services. And then of course, regular monthly trainings for various groups. So in closing, I'd just like to say, trainings, creating safer spaces and community building and placemaking are areas of focus for the community safety program right now. I'm going to go ahead and put some resources for you in the chat. You can request a training or a CPTED security assessment through our online request form. You can also just call me or you can email me. So I'll put that information in the chat for you. All right. Just take one moment here. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Jenny. That was great. So clearly you guys have years and years of experience dealing with the kind of stuff we're all experiencing here, and a lot of resources to offer. So people can reach out to you. And we want to make sure we use our time wisely this evening, but does anybody have any quick questions for Jenny? If you can just raise your hand or do the hand icon, sorry, so we can see you. Okay, I don't see anybody. All right, so Jenny, thank you so much. I know you guys have tons of resources and you're working with people like us all over the city. So you're an extremely valuable resource and we appreciate you being here tonight. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
So Leticia, you're up next, talking to us about advocacy and what's going on and what you're hearing. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to share my screen, so please bear with me a moment. Some of you have received this document from the last forum that we held in our community. And my whole purpose of sharing this is because I am by trade a creative professional. I'm a creative strategist and an art director. I found myself working with Kate Merrill in the work that she does with the Enhanced Services District at Central Eastside Industrial Council. And in my work with her, we decided to use our skills as community organizers to put together some information for people who are citizens who just don't know where to start, because that's the boat that I found myself in. And so there are things that you can do as a citizen to make your voice heard and to try to mitigate some of the crime that we're experiencing in our community. So this document I can share at the end of our call. I'll happily share a link. It's different from the one that I shared previously. It's been amended and updated with some additional resources. But to begin with, I will echo what Jenny said, which is to report every crime, because it's that whole adage, if a tree falls in the woods and no one hears it, well, if a gunshot is fired in Mount Tabor and no one is given an incident number in a police report, it just becomes chatter on Nextdoor, and there's really not any documentation or any, collection of record. So we have to go on the record every time. It doesn't always mean calling 911. I know 911 is completely over inundated, and our police officer on the phone call could definitely attest to that. I know that there are ways beyond that you can report crime. There's a website that's in this document that you can report online. And there's also this wonderful resource that Kate's organization developed that she gave permission to share widely. This is it's a worksheet for crime reporting. And if you click on it, it is a wonderful repository of how to do it and when to do it. So I really advise everybody to take a look at this and see if there is something useful in here so that you can feel, empowered in your reporting. And I do want to reiterate what we said at our first call, which was that it's really essential to get an incident number every time you report. We did a survey before our first meeting just to see, everyone knows crime's been happening, but going on Nextdoor and starting a thread that can sometimes just devolve into, a non-productive conversation isn't going to move the needle. It's not going to change things. It might feel cathartic, and there certainly is a need to hold space for us to be able to vent and talk about how this is affecting us as human beings. But really, we need an avenue to really communicate to the right ears so that we can make change. So one of the ways that Kate recommends, and she's actually not on this call right now because she's currently testifying for her Enhanced Services District funding at a council meeting this evening at this time. But it is really a good idea if you have constructive suggestions. So there are council meetings that you can attend as a citizen and have 3 minutes to say your piece. And the more that you can do this, the right ears will eventually hear. And if 20 people from Mount Tabor are doing this, it's really going to shine a light on the problem. And one of the things that's also recommended is that you come with named and known initiatives or programs that you can ask for specific support around. And so this document that I'm sharing has some suggestions around how to testify. It has the meeting schedule for these meetings. And if you want to go in a group, if anyone is feeling like maybe being a singular person on a Zoom call testifying isn't going to be comfortable, you can arrange to have a group. You just have to call the office in advance and you guys can all come together and have safety in numbers. So the more constructive and the more specific, the more that is going to make a difference, so that we can shine a light on our problem and ask for help and a real, resource to mitigate the safety needs that we have. And then a lot of this is just stuff that I'm echoing from Jenny. We did have a neighborhood watch, and I do believe our captain is on the phone call here, Joe and Merritt. And it's been wonderful to get to know our neighbors, and I 100% agree that it's essential. It's something that isn't going to fix the problem, but it's going to create a support system, and we can look out for each other and share resources, and there's value in that as well. Another neighbor of mine who is active with city government has suggested building coalitions, because we're just one neighborhood. And as Paul mentioned early on, this is happening all over Portland. And there are things that are, further along than we are, because crime has been happening in other neighborhoods for far longer than it has in ours. So it's going to require connecting and making relationships with real people who have access to programs and initiatives. And so these are just recommendations on how we can do it. And, as a group, I think that we decided Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association was a really good centralized place for us to continue this dialogue and to, not duplicate effort and to keep it very productive and focused and specific. You can also, go on Nextdoor, but the people I've spoken to said, not as effective as naming an initiative and going to the right ears and asking for more safety. So these are just recommendations around that. And an example, there's an article here on the Focused Intervention Team, which is a specialized police task force that is focusing on gun violence. And so if you go to a city council meeting and you say to them, as a citizen, I request that you bolster funding and resources to programs like this program, that's going to hold a lot more water than just going there and crying about how upset you are that something happened. And I know that sounds really harsh, and I don't mean to sound harsh, but we're at the point where we really just need to make things happen as citizens, and we have the power to do that. We just need to know the right avenue to do it. And this is a recommended avenue. And in my working with Kate, we've pulled together some resources here that I find very useful. It's very cool that Jenny had that document. I actually put a link to it, the cleanup document, the Portland trash. Here, I'll open it up here while I have my screen. This document is going to be in my Google Doc, and somebody, I think it was Merritt, had a question about the graffiti cleanup. This is where you go for that. And again, reporting every incident, it has to be seen that we have a real problem. So if they don't know about it in the formal channels, then it's like it never happened. So these are just some really neat resources for reporting, for what do you do if X, Y, or Z happens. So I really encourage that. There's also in my document some tips for writing emails. Maybe you are really shy and don't have time to testify. You can also do it in writing, but there are ways to do it in writing that are going to make more of an impact than others. And this is not, this is something I randomly found researching online, and it's not an apples to apples perfect comparison, but I found very useful bits in here. So I encourage you to cherry pick things out of there that when you write in to your elected official, you have the right nomenclature and you are, speaking their language so that they can actually do something about it. So I have the worksheet, I have the tips and the cleanup. I think that was what I wanted to share. And then there's general things in here that I haven't perused 100%, but I found they could be starters of a conversation or starters of a relationship or someplace to start so that we don't feel so helpless and so passive. So that is what I have here today. And I thank you all for your time and for your ears. I really hope that we could work together to change our situation here.
Great, thank you, Leticia. That was wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Leticia? She laid out a lot of good strategies and things that we can do. A key thing is connecting with your neighbors and that you start talking together and you have a relationship and you share information. So any questions? Laura. You need to unmute.
Unmute. There I go. Great. The host needed to do that for me. There was one. Thank you. Both Jenni's and Leticia's information was really helpful for me. I hope for others. The one question in chat was about how to handle the graffiti problem, and Jenni addressed that really well with a neighborhood solution. And Leticia probably has addressed it. And I can add an important point, which is if it's graffiti on traffic signs, street signs, traffic signs, it's really important to contact the city. I actually just Googled City of Portland graffiti street sign, and I then reported it, and the signs were cleaned up really quickly. So, Portland's very much complaint driven. And so keep that in mind. And when we do complain, it works. So that was the only question so far now in chat. Thank you.
Okay, and there was a question about where will Leticia, where you would be sharing those documents. Are those things, I saw you shared a link in the chat. I guess that's stuff we can look at also making available on the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association website. But are there other places where your documents are residing?
I try to collect everything into that Google Doc, and as I find things, I populate the Google Doc with anything new and useful. And I just like to put everything in one place because it's good for my type A personality to collect things and have them organized. So I think also it could be shared out on a follow-up email if Midge would be kind enough to send it out. I know she did it the last Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association meeting.
I can add, I'm finding a link for it. I have to turn my video off to search the internet for it, but I think I have a link and I'll put it in the chat for that document. It'll just take me a moment.
Okay, Leticia, I like your idea that, if we send out a follow-up email to everybody that we sent out the announcement to, we can have links to all these different things and the recording. So that's good. So I see Bing, you've got your hand up as well.
Yes, I put a question in the chat about using the PDX Reporter app. It's a one place to go to report all kinds of different issues. And my question is that effective anymore?
I think it is, Bing. I have a link also in my document, and I have to dig because I've got so many in there, but there is a place where you can report online. And what Kate shared with me too, and Midge will remember this, we have learned that there's going to be more effort behind diverting non-emergency police calls to free up 911. I was astonished by so many people saying that they couldn't get through to 911 when they had a legitimate emergency. So it's good to hear that there's something being done about that. 311 is going to come online. You'll be hearing more and more about that.
Okay.
Yeah, the
And I see,
PDX reporter, you have to register. And what's so good about it is if you're at the site of like a graffiti problem, you can take a picture, download the coordinates, the GPS coordinates, and leave. You know, if you want the city to get back to you, you can choose an option there too.
That's what I was just about to say, Bing. There's an app that a buddy of mine worked on. I thought it was City Source or something like that, but it was basically you download the app and it's anything. If you see a crime taking place, a fire, graffiti, something, you know, crack in a sidewalk, you could take a picture of it, it geotags the picture, and then it sends it to your local city official, and then they can look at it and, you know, arrange for the proper group to respond to the issue in the picture.
great. And I see that Bill has his hand up. I just wanted to say, we've had good luck on our street on 57th with abandoned cars that if they meet the requirements of the city, we have reported them and they've actually been towed away. And then stolen cars, we often get stolen cars dropped off, and my wife was able to determine one of those was stolen, went on next door and said, here's this car, it's stolen. And within half an hour, the people who were the owners contacted her and came and reclaimed their stolen car. So there's a lot of stuff we can be doing to help solve some of these. So Bill, why don't you go ahead? Sean, are you able to unmute Bill?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I'm Bill Levesque. I'm the president of the Hawthorne Boulevard Business Association. And thank you for this. This is a great discussion tonight. You know, I think we've been in our monthly board meeting. We have the issue of crime has been really the dominant question and issue for everyone, and you know, and we have lots of things that we're trying to do, but that's definitely something that we spend a lot of time discussing and trying to figure out. And as I've come up to speed and learned along the way, you know, one of the things that has started to occur to me is there's a spectrum of issue here. One is, you know, at one end of the spectrum you have a crime that has taken place, and there's a question of the responsiveness to that crime or to that action. At the other end of the spectrum is this question of statistics, which is important. You know, what statistically is happening in a given area, what statistically is the cause, and both ends of that spectrum are important. And one end is a very emotional end of the spectrum, when someone has been victimized, that trying to get a response can be frustrating, or it could be rewarding to see some kind of action taking place. But there's a place in the middle that really has to do with, I think, seeing a pattern happening where an area can see a pattern, and there's a frustration that happens in trying to communicate that and trying to get some kind of response to that. So if there's a wave of crime that's occurring and the people in that area can kind of see that there's probably a causal relationship there between something else that's happening and the crimes that are occurring, that's a frustrating place for businesses and individuals to be able to communicate effectively and be able to get some kind of response from the city, and to be able to have a valuable conversation about that. And I think that's the extent of my point at this point, as because, you know, we are working through this, but there are definitely places and areas where we see something happening that's causing a series of issues, and there doesn't seem to be an effective way of being able to communicate that and have some kind of action taken to be able to alleviate some of those crimes that are occurring.
And I think that's where, again, like Leticia was saying, if we're building coalitions, so neighborhoods and business districts and other kind of community groups that we're talking to each other and sharing this information and then going to the city with a common voice.
Yep, right.
I think that raises our visibility in the political realm. So I think we all need to be much more in touch with you and the HPBA and what you're facing. So Leticia, did you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, I think that when I looked at the survey that we sent around and saw that of the people who had turned it in, and we had a huge response rate. We had over 70 people respond with some kind of crime that they either experienced directly, and some of those were violent crimes. Of those, only 50% of the people reported the crime. And when we asked why, what was the barrier, they have a perception that they get blown off. And at our last call, people did tell anecdotes about that feeling very futile, like we're reporting it. We called an officer and they gave us the sense that they're so overwrought and so just completely overwhelmed that even though we had a video of a person who was brandishing a gun, it wasn't enough to get a police report. And I had to continue to be dogged in demanding a police report. So I say all this to really use this opportunity with the ears that we're fortunate enough to have on the call. Anyone in law enforcement who could speak to what we can do as citizens and what kind of suggestions or recommendations that you could make, because it's very clear that we have a problem. We haven't been able to report every incident. So from the outsider looking in, it doesn't seem like anything's happening, but I assure you, there's a lot happening.
But I think that's where the rub is that, so incidents are, again, that's at one end where something has occurred and people are discouraged about reporting that. And the city is saying, well, you need to report it so that we can statistically understand that. And I guess what I'm suggesting is there's a place in the middle for a dialogue to take place to say, you know what, we're seeing a particular source that we think could be causing some of this, and we should understand that so we can respond, because the neighborhoods and the neighborhoods have a more of a clearer understanding. Again, not at the crime level, but in the case of understanding what's going on right now in our neighborhood.
Yeah,
and that's not a statistical question. That's more of a case kind of question.
Yeah, I think it's that on the ground community knowledge and wisdom. Since we're all here in our community, we can see patterns and things happening that the police may not be able to have access to. So the more, if there are avenues for us to actually share that with them to help
that's
them
right
focus their efforts.
Because the data points are important and you need to collect those things so you can understand it statistically. But there's another opportunity, I think, for having a discussion so that there may be other things that can intervene to stop the crimes in the first place.
Yes, it's an excellent point. Right. And again, we also should be clear, there's perception of what we're experiencing in the community. And sometimes we think that the city's not doing anything, but the city may be doing a lot. But if we're not seeing evidence of it in our neighborhood, there's a disconnect. And so I think we just need to always be sensitive to the fact that the city may be doing a lot, but we need to know more about what they're doing. And if it's not visible in our neighborhoods and solving the problems, what more needs to be done. So I think that's a good segue into our next half of the forum, where we're going to actually be hearing from our wonderful representatives from the Police Bureau and Commissioner Dan Ryan's office. So I just want to check and see, well, Commander Erica Hurley, you're still here, aren't you? And I think Brian Ossenkopf said he would be back at 8, so that's 1 minute from now. And want to see if Mark Bond.
Here, Paul.
Okay. Oh, there, I see you now. Okay, so there's Brian. Erica Hurley, I had saw you earlier. Are you here? Okay,
And
what
I can
about?
get started if you want. I can
Okay,
get
well, let
started.
me just check and see if Mark Bond and Darian Jones, are you here?
I'm looking for them too, to try and unmute them.
Okay.
And we want to make sure and unmute Ricardo as well from Commissioner Rubio's office in case he wants to say anything. But maybe we can start with you, Brian. We just want, maybe you can introduce yourself and just, any introductory remarks you want to make. But, given what you're hearing, our overarching question is, what can Portlanders do to keep themselves and their families safe? So that's the overarching question, but you've been hearing some of the stuff that's coming up. And so we're really interested to know what's the reality from your end for the police, and how can we support you, or what are the things we should be doing strategically to increase safety for us? So Brian, why don't you go ahead?
I will. And I'll just start by saying I appreciate the Mount Tabor Neighborhood Association. You have a rich history for sure, and as well as the Western Seminary for organizing, this deal tonight. My name is Brian Ossenkop. I'm the assistant chief of operations, which means that I supervise the 3 precincts that we have in the city of Portland. So I have 3 commanders that report to me. I've been a police officer since October of 1994 here in the city of Portland. So that's 27 and a half years. Erica Hurley, the commander of East Precinct, got hired about 4 weeks before me, right? And she never forgets to remind me of that whenever I see her. What I'd like to do is kind of talk about some of the things that are going on in the police bureau, kind of where we're at today, and then maybe that might help address some of the concerns. And then I'm happy to answer questions. I know Erica wants to talk about some of the missions that East Precinct has been running. For UUMV, or stolen cars that have actually had an impact on gun violence. So, for me, trying to look at like an organizational level, and granted, my perspective is operations, or the police officer that you guys rely on to take your radio calls. But, one of the things that, post-COVID that we really are trying to do is figure out a way, given staffing, on how we can re-engage with community, right? With our dwindling resources, and be intentional about community engagement. And so one of the ways we can do that is through our neighborhood response teams. And, having worked all 3 precincts, back in the day we had 5 precincts, but we've got 3. Those neighborhood response teams have different roles depending on which precinct that you work on. And the part of the goal of the NERT team, other than just the community engagement part, is to reduce the call load for the officers that are taking radio calls every day, solving problems, right, that are important with the community, and then educating people on what police's role is. I heard a little bit of talk tonight about FIT, or the Focused Intervention Team, and that's our gun violence reduction. And that's going to take some, right? I mean, it's hard to explain. Back in the 90s, I worked on the gang enforcement team for 5 years when we had a gun violence. I mean, we had a problem just like we have today back in the 90s. And we only began to solve the problem through the relationship that we had with community and faith groups. But it truly depended on the relationships that we had with the folks that are involved in gun violence. And that's going to take some time to develop those. And then, of course, we have a community oversight group, has a role with our focused intervention team, and that's the FIT call. And they're going to be focused mostly on accountability and identification of our shooters, right? It's establishing those relationships, investigations, arrests, and then reporting out, or that's the transparency piece. And then with regard to community engagement in our patrol or district officers, it's much more difficult because of staffing. Officers right now in all 3 precincts are completely call driven, and they're event driven. And we'll talk about that a little bit. There's been an increased call load, and it's hard to explain, if you're not used to looking at that kind of data. But when you look at police call load, we look at priority calls, right? We prioritize calls. For instance, a shooting call, you may end up with an entire patrol shift on it, whereas a shoplift call just takes one police officer. So we look at the priority level of our calls. In the last few years, violent crime has spiked and the priority level of our radio calls has gone through the roof. And so when we go to radio calls now, typically it takes more police officers to respond to those calls than it used to in the past in triage. We're hopeful that 311 will kind of help us triage some of those radio calls. And then down the road, we're hoping that Portland Street Response will have an impact on our radio calls as well over time, particularly with, people that have substance abuse issues or mental health issues when it comes to welfare checks. And then of course,
can you or Commander Hurley just say a little bit more about that program and what that offers? Because I think lots of people, go ahead.
I'll let Commander Hurley, talk more about that program. I can tell you that as of this week, it went citywide, but it's still in kind of an infancy. I mean, they're only taking, a few radio calls a day. But as time goes on and that program gets better, then I think that they'll have more of an impact. Right now, their impact isn't huge because of their staff levels. And they're still kind of trying to figure out kind of, what they're going to be doing. They're dealing mostly with substance abuse and mental health issues, and those are typically welfare checks.
But in many cases, a lot of the sort of threatening, scary stuff people are experiencing are people who clearly, many people have mental health issues that are not scary and are not threatening to anyone, but some people who have that actually are of concern. And so I think we're interested just knowing more as that program evolves, what that might offer to community members. So
sure,
either
and
you or Commander Hurley, if you can talk about that.
And if there's a threat, obviously, then it's going to be a police related call, right? They're going to defer to the police. If it's all threatening, then they're going to defer to the Portland Police Bureau. And I'll just kind of continue here for now. We can come back to the Portland Street Response.
I just want to note that I see Commander Hurley now, so you're there.
Is she here?
Yeah, I am. Thank you.
Can you talk, Erica? Can you talk just quickly about kind of Portland Street Response and the pilot project out in Lentz and how that went?
Yeah. So can you hear me? Okay?
Yes.
Okay, so the Portland Street Response was started at East Precinct. It actually started in the Lentz neighborhood, and they began with just one group. So initially they were firefighters. There was one paramedic and one mental health clinician that was the group, and they went out in Lentz only initially. And now they've grown. They have 4 different partnerships that go out. The Fire Bureau is no longer a part of it, so they're just 2 mental health clinicians as opposed to a paramedic with the fire department now. And they take their definition of it is what's called low acuity calls. So if there's no threat and there's no weapon, then they will take those calls. So when you talk about the ones that are the mental health that are scaring people, PSR does not take those calls. So if there's any threat of violence or belief that the person is violent or the person has been violent in the past, or they have a weapon or implying a weapon, PSR does not take those calls. They become police calls. They do answer not only to a 911 call, but businesses can call them directly to have somebody maybe removed from their lobby or their place of business. They'll go into just a lobby of a business. They do not go into homes or into any kind of apartments or any other structures. They'll just go into business lobbies. And then they'll come, obviously, if there's in a parking lot or on the side of the street or the sidewalk, that kind of thing. So they do those kind of things. The police bureau can also call them. So sometimes we will show up on a call that's a mental health call that has no police nexus. So there's no threat to anybody and there's no crime involved. And we will call them to come and help with resources. They take, they increased to citywide just 2 days ago, I think. And they're also taking, they also create their own calls. So they'll drive around, they'll see somebody that's out that appears to be having some mental health crisis or issues, and they will engage with them and try to get them resources. So they also create their own calls.
Okay. And Leticia, I just want to make sure that if you have any particular questions from what you've been hearing from the community for our police representatives, please feel free to unmute and share those questions.
Well, the thing that I've heard from my peers is, how can we support you? Because we want to be able to go to our elected officials and name initiatives and programs that are going to get you more people in your offices to push paper so that the police that are the trained officers can be responding on the streets. I forget what they're called, but they're like level 3 officers who do the intake. We want to be aware and informed of what we need to ask for to bolster your efforts, because you have been through so much and we need you. So how can we, as citizens, ask for things by name, and who do we talk to? And then also, I understand that the sheriff's office operates in a different capacity and has a different purview. So we want to make sure we're barking up the right tree. I appreciate Commander Hurley telling us, the difference between what that team does versus the more trained professionals to take people who have weapons and violence. So, we just are getting educated right now, and how can we help you? I think that's the short end of it.
So that's a great question. So the PS3s is what you're referring to. They take very low level calls. Like I talked about just a few minutes ago, what we're seeing is a huge increase in priority level calls, right? Those are your shootings. To be honest with you, just a few years ago, the city was in the 300s as far as shootings, right? We had 1,300 shootings last year, 92 homicides. And so when you think about an injury shooting, if that happens at 10 o'clock at night at East Precinct, that takes every single police officer working the street in East Precinct to process that shooting. So there's not a single radio call that's being taken in East Precinct while that shooting's going on. Last year, we had 1,300 of those in the entire city. So when you look at how we staff, right? When Eric and I got hired in 1994, we had almost 1,200 police officers in the city of Portland. And the population in the city of Portland was right around 400,000, right? Now we're sitting around 650,000, and we're taking twice as many radio calls, and we have about 778 police officers, right? So when I look at how many deployable police officers I have in operations right now, our data team, based on our staffing study and 4-shift configuration, just to take the radio calls. That's not to run a mission. That's not to work livability, or just to take the radio calls. Bare minimum, we need about 370 cops, and we're sitting right now, I've got about 315 deployable police officers. And so we have too much work and not enough cops to do the work. And so that's one of the things, I suppose, that I would be talking to the folks across the street is that we simply need more police officers to do the work.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that Damien, you've got your hand up. Can you put into the chat if you have a particular question and let us know so we can know how to respond to you. And then Ricardo has his hand up. So I wonder if you want to say anything from Commissioner Rubio's perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I'll let Commander Hurley finish up and then I can go.
Okay. Commander
So when
Hurley,
you ask one of the things that you can ask for from across the street, what we need is people, but just asking for people isn't going to solve the problem. We have to have somebody willing to actually sign up to be a Portland police officer. I went to a community meeting earlier today, and I went to one last night as well. And I asked all the community members there how many of them would ask their children to be police officers today, and about 5 raised their hand. So the fact that no one even wants their own community members to become police officers is a problem. So what we need is a PR program, and we need to have a concise program put together to bring people here and to bring our own community members that are growing up to become police officers. And we don't have that. You can drive around the city and you can see that Spokane has billboards up, and Multnomah County Sheriff's Office has billboards up, and Boise has billboards up. And so they are doing a wonderful job of taking our police officers and making them police officers other places. But we do not have the staffing ability or money to do our own PR program to bring people to Portland and to be police officers. And that's one of the things you could ask for.
Thanks for that clarification. So Ricardo, go ahead.
Thanks, Paul. And again, this is Ricardo with Commissioner Reeves' Office, Policy Director. I will say that I can probably spend the next 3 to 5 hours talking about this issue alone with you all. And I'm really glad that you all are having this conversation. It actually also comes in a very timely manner because earlier today, we had a work session, a budget work session specifically focused on community safety, where we had all first responding bureaus speaking on the needs of Portlanders and what the infrastructure is looking both internally and externally. I think it's important to also recognize in part of this conversation that Portland for a long time prior really benefited being a really safe city. And it wasn't until recent years that really things started spiking up. Because we benefited from being such a safe city, we didn't invest in internal and external infrastructures to really meet the demand that we're seeing today. So not only is the police bureau not situated to be able to respond to things to the current need that we're facing today, our community partners are also in the same boat. And when we're seeing other jurisdictions that have been able to see the same spikes of gun violence like we are, but have been able to meet that spike and gone to lower levels, sometimes even similar to lower levels that they were before, the number one question that's asked is, how did you do it? And the number one answer they say is, well, 5 years ago, we invested in infrastructure, both internally and externally with our community partners. So now in Portland, we're having to have this difficult conversation about what does it mean to have a long-term approach to this issue and a short-term approach to this issue. Long-term, we can make the investments today, but they're not going to actualize until probably 2, 3, 4 years from now. That means investing in community services. That means investing in the infrastructures within the bureaus in the city, Portland Street Response, the PS3s, being able to help the Bureau on recruitment and retention of police officers. Right now, there's a high degree of vacancies and there is a recruitment issue. So we do need to address those matters, but we also have to be real with ourselves here about the situation that we're in and how undercapacitated we are in terms of our services. So we're having those conversations right now. Mike Myers, as the new Community Safety Transition Director, has been really critical in bringing all these elements together and seeing a holistic approach to this matter. And we are hoping that we are building into an ecosystem, right? Not solely on a law enforcement approach, not solely on a community-based approach, because both of these entities will tell each other. There needs to be an ecosystem support in all these matters, or else we're not really going to get to the root causes of why people are committing community violence, but we're also not going to be able to address the immediate needs of tomorrow and tonight, right, of the shootings that will happen. So it's an ecosystem, it's multi-dynamic, and we are having those conversations. Paul, I think you mentioned the city might be doing things, right? And it's just really hard to see it when it's not so apparent early on. That's really the biggest question that we've been having at City Hall is how can we actually make investments that are not only addressing things that will come to actualization in 2 to 3 years, but for tomorrow. And those are just some of the tough questions that we're trying to answer at City Hall as well. But we're committed to actually reaching a solution.
Thank you for that. And I'm just curious if all of you could talk a little
on that.
Go ahead, Brian.
Follow up on that. I mean, yeah, I understand, right, Ricardo, what you're saying. But right now, it's like we have a femoral bleed, right? It needs a tourniquet. And so, and I think people feel as though we're just putting a Band-Aid on it. So we understand where you're coming from. We understand your fears. And we're working as hard as we can to try and make that better for all you guys. And part of that is with data, looking at violent crime, looking at property crime, but we understand, people's fear right now, particularly surrounding gun violence.
And Leticia, you had a question. I think you're muted.
Yes, muted. Yeah, well, I'm learning in observing Kate with the Enhanced Services District that the degree to which you can name specific initiatives and programs, the more effective you will be in, advocating for safety.
Or we will be in the community.
We will be, yes, that's what I mean, us as a collective citizen group. So I wonder, does anybody have any, I think that's part of the next steps if we're to continue momentum in building this infrastructure that Ricardo is talking about. But are there things that we can ask for by name or initiatives that are already in place so that we're not duplicating effort, so that we can identify assets, if you will, and cling on to those assets and strengthen those assets so that we can create some kind of change with that? I mean, I know that might sound very overly optimistic, but we're trying to come with the assets and the recommendations and the suggestions to move us out of this woe is me hand wringing that we've been in. I think we need to kind of get to the next level, right?
What should we be asking for? Are there specific programs other than just more police officers?
Yeah, I mean, quite frankly, it's again, when I say ecosystem, right? It's not just internal and external, and it's not just police bureau. It really is looking at a multi-bureau dynamic here as well. And so when we're talking about what is the next step beyond just the police officers as well, right? We're talking about the PS3s. Leticia, I think you're the one that mentioned even just getting a police report going through is a hassle, right? So how are we actually freeing up sworn officers that are armed to be able to take on those higher priority calls without having to spend 25, 35, 45 minutes on a different call that a PS3 could prioritize and take a report from, right? We're looking at those systems. And in fact, right now, the Office of Management and Finance is working with the Bureau to do an analysis of just capacity of the Portland Police Bureau and seeing, hey, where are the biggest systemic needs and shifts that need to happen for us to be able to really adequately respond to Portlanders when they're calling 911. An additional one is also within the 911 system. What are some of the systemic changes that need to happen in our 911 calls so that we're able to prioritize the response at a higher rate for Portlanders and having the right resources for folks when you are given a call, and ultimately having a response that's adequate and timely. So we're having those conversations as well. Funding in those aspects is going to be pretty critical. And then it's been mentioned here a few times as well, the Portland Street Response. Now, that is a very young program still. It still requires a significant amount of development, but there is a high appetite and the gears are moving for this to be a citywide expansion very early on. So we are hoping to see some results pretty soon. I think they've already responded to over 1,000 incidents to date. And we're hoping as they continue to expand, they'll be able to continue to free up some of the cases that police officers are responding to. And again, therefore, officers will be able to respond to gun violence related incidents.
Thank you. And I just want to double check whether Mark Bond or Darian Jones from Commissioner Ryan's office are on the call. If you are, please let us know. Or
I texted them and I don't think they're online.
Okay. One thing that I also wanted to
really quick to that, Paul.
Go ahead.
So when it comes to the PS3s, the PS3s, like I said, take low level calls. For instance, when we get enough PS3s, then a police officer won't have to take a stolen vehicle report anymore, or actually recover a stolen car. A PS3 will be able to take that for them. But the calls that are stacking up are priority level calls, and those, for the most part, those are calls that PS3s are not able to take. Right there, those are calls that they can't take. So. I mean, we appreciate the PS3s. The PS3s are a huge part of the police family, but the calls that are stacking up today typically aren't calls that PS3s are even qualified to take. That requires a police officer.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's one thing that's really important, I think Jenny brought up earlier, is that different communities within Portland may view public safety differently. And I think the city for decades has needed to have a very diverse conversation with the community. What does community safety look like to you in your community? I remember years ago, different immigrant refugee communities, they really wanted, they were having a whole bunch of crime problems in East Portland and places, but there were they needed people to come talk to them and their community and see what does public safety look like to them. And I think one size doesn't fit all, and the better we're all able to recognize that different people have different needs around public safety or community safety, I think the more honest and sort of equitable will be in pushing forward. So I hope that somebody in the city, whether it's any of the commissioner's office, the Office of Civic Community and Civic Life, somebody, or if it ends up being the community, we need to start having those discussions of what does community safety look like to you in your neighborhood, your community. So I don't, is anything like that happening, or is that something we should be trying to push forward?
It's happening in different levels within the city. Again, Director Mike Myers has been a pretty critical kind of glue to having that conversation. And I think part of it is that we just have to be able to get our house in order here at the city of Portland to be able to come into those kind of conversations of what is the next phase, what is the next step of defining community safety, and in making sure that we're, again, still providing a realistic approach to what the ecosystem needs to look like. I think oftentimes the conversation leans one way or the other, when in fact, it's everybody that needs to show up, and it's our responsibility to be able to resource that ecosystem. So we're having those conversations. We're trying to figure out what is the right formula for us to be able to have an adequate response and evolve to a new phase of community safety. And part of that, in that equation, something that I really appreciated of today's work session for community safety was hearing from AC From on the projections for hiring police officers, right? So I think he mentioned something about 200 applicants applying to be police officers in this past month at the Bureau. So people are turning in applications to be police officers here. We're gonna maybe see a 10% clearance rate from this. So 20 potential people becoming police officers. That's still not meeting the gap that will be needed to fill the vacancies that we currently have within the Bureau. So within that, I think it's important to, again, continue to look at retention, recruitment, what are we doing to set up the right atmosphere for this ecosystem and building those dynamics. But in terms of the next phase of public safety, it's happening. It's not happening enough.
Yeah, I think we go ahead.
Can I answer to that a little bit? You talked about the fact that we police the way the community asks us to, and the community have different needs. And I completely agree with that. And many years ago, when we had the number of officers that we used to have, we had community policing officers. They were neighborhood livability officers, so NLOs. And then we had a much higher, we had a much larger neighborhood response teams. Those officers were specifically to go to the community meetings and find out what community needed and what they wanted and what their expectation of the police bureau was. And so that's what we've lost, right? So we don't have an officer time-wise to be able to go and sit in these meetings and figure it out. We can, as a city, we can look at things and say, this is the most highest priority and this is what we need to deal with. But sometimes you go into a community meeting and it's really speeding that they're unhappy with, right? They're not worried about something else that another neighborhood is talking about. But you can only learn that by sitting down and having conversations like we're doing here in this meeting. And that takes people to do. One of the things that I like to explain to people in the sense of our ability time-wise, they did a study a couple of years ago of East Precinct, and so we have a higher call load and specifically a higher call load of high priority calls now than we did when the study was done. But at the C shift, which is my afternoon shift, minimums on during C shift is 16 officers for the entirety of East Precinct if I fully staffed, which I'm rarely fully staffed. And the study showed that they had 15 minutes a day that they were not on a 911 call. So that's 15 minutes a day really to maybe grab lunch or have roll call. But that isn't time to go meet the business owners. That isn't time to get to know the neighborhoods. That isn't time to be able to go to the neighborhood community meetings. That's what we've lost with the lack of staffing that we have, right? And so Leticia, you talked about what programs we need to ask for. Those are all programs that we need back that we used to have. And that was stuff that was put in with community policing, which actually started many, many years ago, but we did a hard push of that in the early 90s. And it truly changed the dynamic of how we interacted with the community. And it changed the crime stats that we had seen in the late 80s and the early 90s when Brian and I came on. But the other thing to try to explain is that police officers are hard to come by anywhere in the country right now. It's not Portland specific. They're hard to come by anywhere. When Brian and I tested, and yeah, I'll throw out that I got here 4 weeks before you, Brian. But when Brian and I tested, we tested with 5,000 people at the Expo Center. They did a test once a year, and there were 5,000 people that showed up to take that test. That's a huge difference between us getting a few hundred. And even back in that time, we had less than 10% of those 5,000 would make it. But we were able to fill our ranks that way, right? And so now you have other agencies who pay as well as we do, don't have the politics of Portland, don't have some of the other things that we deal with here. And so it's easier to go to Clackamas County or to Clark County or to Vancouver or any of these other agencies. We have to figure out a way to make people want to work here. And I'll tell you, it's a great agency. I've been here for 27 years and I love the Portland Police Bureau. But we have to figure out a way to sell that so people understand they need to come. And then we can put those programs in place that help answer to the questions that you're asking for.
Right. Good. Thanks for explaining that. So Damien, Damien's been waiting for a while here and you're unmuted now. So Damien, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to make a couple of quick comments. My name is Damien Barron. I live on 58th and Salmon, lifelong Portland resident, born and raised in 46 in Madison. Currently live on 58th and Salmon, as I stated earlier. I'm frustrated. I'm fed up. I'm really ready for a change to our city to come back to the way it has been for my whole entire life. Officer Erica and Officer Brian, I appreciate personally your service to our community. I know that a lot of tools have been taken away from you guys, and that's really frustrating for me as a citizen of the city, a lifelong citizen of the city. I would like to see some of those tools that were taken away from you given back to you so that you guys can do the job that you guys are there to do, which is sincerely appreciated. Crime is huge in our city now, right here in our own neighborhood, in the Mount Tabor neighborhood. I think the root cause for a lot of these crimes is exactly what has been spoken about today, and that is mental health and substance abuse. So that needs to be addressed first. We need to give the tools back to the police officers that have been taken away. I'm a father of 4 children, a freshman all the way down to a 4th grader. I don't have the time to attend a city council meeting. I don't have the time to attend this meeting. I couldn't do my homework with my 4th grade son tonight. I had to put it off on my wife, who's a substitute school teacher, to be able to attend this meeting. But it's important to me. I'm busy in my community. I'm busy with my family, but I am really, really frustrated and fed up with what has happened to our city. And I would like to see some significant changes. And I understand that the Portland Police Bureau has had some significant tools taken away from them again, and they don't have the staffing to do the job that they need to do. It's lawless in our city. You drive the streets, there are people that speed through residential streets at 55 miles an hour and they don't care. There are children and families and walkers and runners everywhere. You guys have, from the news that I watch, you have 1 traffic officer for the whole entire city. That's not acceptable. Our daughter is going to get a driver's license in less than a year. I'm afraid for her to go out and drive. I could go off on a big tangent, but I do need to get our kids to bed, the little boys, and I just wanted to be able to speak my piece. Again, I appreciate this meeting, this forum tonight, and kind of wanted to speak my piece. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien.
Damien, can I answer to just a couple things?
Damien, are you still there?
He is, but he muted himself. Hang on, let me unmute him.
Thanks, Sean.
Still here. Thank you.
Yeah, Damien, just to give you a couple things. AC Austin talked a little bit earlier about doing at East precinct, and specifically, we're doing some of them in your neighborhood. So I just want you to be aware of that. So we are doing missions twice a month, one day shift and one afternoon shift. And then our neighborhood response team are doing missions weekly, specifically in the business districts for the neighborhood response team. But with the missions that we are doing in your neighborhood, they are specific to deal with a lot of those issues that you're talking about. We're running traffic and pulling over speeders and writing tickets, and specifically looking for stolen cars, which is a huge component that plays into shootings and all of the other crimes that we see. And so it's not a solution by any stretch of the imagination, but I hear you, and I know what's happening in your neighborhood. We look at those statistics, and more importantly, I talk to the neighbors I know. My neighborhood response team goes out and knows. And I just want you to know that we hear you, and we are doing what we can with the staffing that we have. Those are all overtime missions. So those are things that we have to do all on overtime, and bring officers in on their days off. So it makes it difficult, but we're doing our best.
And so
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Damien. So Leticia, I saw asked a question about who actually makes the decision about providing more funding for police. And then Michelle asked about whether potential charter for reform that's coming down the line, would that have any effect on you guys? Or so who actually makes the decision about funding and levels and charter reform?
I can probably answer some of that, Paul, and before
Okay.
Damien has to go, if you have to go, I just want to also address, I want to appreciate you taking time and actually having this conversation in the space as well, but I also find it as a pretty significant responsibility for council offices as well as just the city to be able to show up in these spaces and not just expect folks to come into city council meetings, work sessions, places that are typically in the middle of the day. So again, I appreciate you voicing that, and our hope is that we continue to be as proactive and present in these spaces. To your question, Paul, about making the decisions in the budget, it's all of council, right? So throughout the budget process, all the bureaus come up with their original proposals. They get submitted to the mayor's office. The mayor's office then proposes he has kind of the first crack at proposing a citywide budget that then the council gets to review, and then they collectively decide, okay, what's going to be the final number on that budget? And again, that's for every single bureau, including the Portland Police Bureau. Ultimately, there can be budget notes that can dictate how certain dollars are used within each bureau. But the commissioner in charge, if there's some discretionary aspects to some of these funds, the commissioner in charge also has some ability to use those dollars in discretion, right? And that's limited in many ways by the budget process, but there might be an opportunity for a commissioner in charge of a bureau to be able to do that.
But the bigger issue is that the whole council, is going to vote on the budget. It's a political decision of where we put our priorities. So I think, again, that's sort of what Leticia has been saying is
that's right.
The more people in the community get organized and are able to clearly articulate things that we want and what success would look like to us. And I think that's, Ricardo, what we were saying earlier about perception, that if you felt that the community were safe, what would that look like, and how would that different than what's happening now, and what would it take to get there? And I think it's not enough that there's activity of government, there needs to be the results visible in the community. And so I think that, Leticia, you've helped us think about that. I was just curious, Commander Hurley, you guys were talking about, it sounded like the older, community policing model. Wonderful Tom Potter years ago, who was promoting that and a real champion of that there was a real partnership between the police and the community. And it sounds like you were describing some different officers that you used to have that used to engage with the community on problem solving. What would it take to get that back? What would we need to ask for to get more officers that can actually work with the community and sort of longer term, not just respond to 911 calls?
You want to answer that, Brian, or you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we've been talking about that for years. When you look at community policing, and when you actually define community policing, it relies on a shared responsibility between the police and the community in creating a safer and more livable city. And so In order to do that, and how we used to do that, is you had district officers that worked their district every single day. When you came to work, you worked the same area. You knew who the neighbors were. You knew who the administrators were in the schools were. You knew who the pastors were in the churches, because we simply had more staffing, right? And we didn't have as many radio calls back then that drove our work, and so we got to spend time getting out of our police cars and just having conversations with people, and then working on neighborhood livability type issues or neighborhood problems. It just comes down to call load, and it comes down to staffing. And we were, I was just talking to the chief last week about that. We're talking about maybe piloting that in each one of the precincts, but we simply don't have the capacity. So we're going to have to we're going to do the best that we can to try and increase our neighborhood response team just a little bit to be able to pilot that in each precinct. But in order to do that, we're not going to be able to do something else, which is why, I agree with what Ricardo was saying when he's talking about building an ecosystem. And when we talk about as a group, what it is that we can do, I think you guys can, and I think council would appreciate you guys showing up and letting council know what that ecosystem needs to look like, right? I mean, I think that's what council would like to see, would be the community to weigh in and say, this is what we think that ecosystem needs to look like. Mm-hmm. And if for you that means having a district officer, then that's what it means. If it means more, Portland street response, then, so yeah. And Erica, if you want to add to that.
He's absolutely right. The community police. So one of the things that people don't understand in the sense of how community policing works is we have districts. Every precinct has a certain number of districts. When we were young officers and had the police officers, every district, and most of them had 2 cops in the district. So you might have 920s, but you have 920 and 921. So for every shift, you had 2 cops in every district. And then that had the ability for those police officers to have those contacts and make time and do those things. Now I zero out more. When I say zero out, it means I do not fill. I don't put a police officer in over half of the districts in East Precinct. I don't have the staffing to put them in there. Even if I was fully staffed, which I'm not, I still couldn't put an officer in every district because we don't have enough police officers. The whole idea of data-driven policing has its positives and its negatives. One of the positives is it helps us focus our resources where they need to go for crime and things that are happening and so forth in the city, and use those resources to the best of our ability. The negative part about it is if you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have a high crime rate, then I'm not going to put a police officer in your district because it's not where the 911 calls are coming from. But it also means then you don't have an officer that knows you. It means you don't have an officer that knows those businesses that are there. You lost the community aspect of that because I don't have an officer to put there, because honestly, the data says that you don't have enough crime for me to put one there. And so there's the benefits and negatives for how we use our resources. But it has changed what we all saw as community policing back in the day. One of the things Brian will explain to you, when we started, most of the community policing that we did, when we stopped and walked parks, when we stopped and talked to kids, when we stopped in the businesses and talked to the business owners and did all of these different things, we never put that on a computer, right? We didn't say that we were out doing that. So when they looked at our day, they would have X number of hours free with nothing to do. That's actually not accurate. We were out doing those things, but available if a major call came in. So we left ourselves clear on the radio. But those things then had an adverse effect in that, well, you don't need as many police officers because they're not taking 911 calls. And so we didn't do a very good job as the police department to say, no, we're not taking a 911 call, but we are engaging with the community in these different ways. And so it has changed a little bit the aspect of community policing for that. I know we're at like 8:45 and I'm seeing there's several questions in the chat. Are you okay if I answer a few of those, or would you like to, do you have specific
go
things
ahead.
to talk about?
Go ahead.
Just to answer a few of those things. So one of the questions is the volunteer police program. We don't have one anymore. So we used to have the reserve program. That reserve program went away with when the Department of Justice came in. The way the agreement was done with the city and us, the reserves are required, the volunteers are required to go through exactly the same training, the number of hours of training, the number of policy training, all of that as a police officer. Well, most volunteers don't have time to give that amount of time to their full-time job and then give a minimum of 80 hours a year just in training to the Portland Police Bureau, right, in order to keep that program. So that reserve program was done away with. We don't have a volunteer reserve program anymore. That's one of the questions in there. One of the things they talked about was, how do you keep your car from getting stolen? Putting a club on the car is helpful. They have a couple of different kinds, but that is always very helpful to put a club on your car. The other thing is, and I'm guilty of this, so I'm not judging, but if you have a garage and it's full of stuff other than your car, get all the stuff out and put the car in the garage, because that is the number one way that will help you keep your car from being stolen. The other thing, obviously, is that you have the ability for LoJack and those kinds of things to help you then find the car later. There are certain models and certain cars that are easier to steal. And so those are the ones that are stolen a lot. And so a club on them is really the best option, or an alarm that you would wake up to come out to. But even that sometimes can be too late by the time they get through. So the other thing talked
Can I hop in
about.
right really quick,
Please.
Erica? Yeah, so one of the things that we just use an example is the correlation between recovered stolen vehicles, right? When you think about a recovered car, it's going to be recovered in a different place that it was stolen from, and then the recovery of things taken in the burglary. And so we've been working with our data folks, and it started with Toyota. I'll use an example in North Precinct, that Toyota plant up there in North Portland was seeing 3 to 5 cars stolen every single night on their lot. So we worked with them, kind of like what Civic Life was talking about earlier as far as septed. And then and we noticed that there was a pretty big camp up there. And so we abated a camp. We worked with Toyota to deal with some of their septed things. And then we started looking at where we recovered vehicles and where we recovered stolen property. We recovered a bunch of vehicles out of a camp, and we made a whole bunch of burglary cases. And what we realized was that the next 2 weeks after we abated that camp and made 3 arrests for burglary, Toyota hasn't had a stolen car in 2 months, and burglary in the entire city went down by 50% just from abating a camp and making 3 separate arrests. So, for us, trying to get smarter, right, on how we correlate, recovering stolen vehicles and making burglary cases, we're recovering burglary property as well. Kind of goes hand in hand with what Eric is talking about as far as your stolen cars.
So Michelle, you had some questions. Did you just raise your hand? You had asked a question about the charter change. Does a change in our form of government affect you guys, the police, or what you're trying to do? Or Ricardo, can you speak to that?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit on that. The question's still up there, right? And we are still waiting for the commission to present to us what the full package will look like. But if we are changing our form of government or not, there's a huge appetite from the city council to just change the way in which we are addressing community safety and public safety. The siloed way has not worked for a long time. It's never really worked, and it's fundamentally not the right approach. So we are expecting a shift in government structure from the Charter Commission, but regardless of what that comes up, when it comes about or how it comes about, we are in just the path of changing the way things are being done, and consolidating a lot of the resources and increasing collaborative interactions between bureaus, first responding bureaus, not just within operations, but also just in structure. And in budgets, right? And so we're going to see a shift. We're going to see a change, and we're hoping that it's going to be for the better. We're hoping that it's going to be a collective effort for the better of Portland.
Thank you for that. I had a question for Jenny. In the past, crime prevention, I know our neighborhood worked a lot with crime prevention staff. They were a real valuable bridge between the community and the police. And I don't want to put you on the spot, so you don't have to say anything if you don't feel comfortable, but can you say anything about, is that something we could rebuild? Or, again, I think we're talking about how can the community support the police, engage with the police more effectively. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I can say that when I started in this work 15 years ago, the police bureau was staffed much differently. I worked closely with the neighborhood response team, and there were police bureau contact offices all around the city as well. You could walk in and chat with your district officer. pretty much any time. And those officers really took ownership of their districts as well. There's a lot of pride in the areas that they served and knowing the communities. And they just, you don't have enough people to maintain that structure. I can say that the neighborhood response team, from my perspective, those men and women, boy, they bring it, and they are tasked with so many different things. And so often I hear, well, the neighborhood response team is doing this and they're doing that. And I'm not surprised, because they just, they can do it all, and they're fantastic. All of the officers are. Our relationship with the police bureau, you know, we treasure that, and we want to continue to foster, you know, that kind of liaison relationship with the community, you know, where we can. Our program is doing the best we can with very few people, just like the police bureau is. But I can tell you, I still have great relationships with the NERT sergeant that I work with at Central Precinct. I get referrals from him. We keep in touch. I also wanted to add to what Ricardo was saying, which is our program is part of that conversation with Mike Meyer's office as well, which is what role can we play in this, as he referred to it, as a larger ecosystem of safety for the city. And, you know, it's, these conversations are happening, and it's really important that everyone's a part of it, big or small. Our program, there's just 5 of us doing this work, but we're providing hundreds of trainings every year for Portland and security assessments. I recently met with Natasha Hansberger, an officer with Portland Police Bureau, about how we can provide our trainings for refugee and immigrant communities and access language services and start making that happen. And so all of those things are happening, and we're just kind of forging ahead as 5 coordinators doing what we can. You know, what was being said about the Toyota situation with the stolen cars, you know, those types of situations, if they come up, you know, our role might be to do a security assessment, but then we may also be able to make that connection for the police and the business and the community. So there's always that opportunity there where we might play that role. It's just, you know, it can play out in different ways, but I would just say, Paul, that those relationships are still there. It's personally, for me, heartbreaking to see the Bureau struggling with staffing. And, you know, I often think about the way things used to be, the good old days when we had all these resources. And it's my hope that we get back to having all those resources, and that we are prepared for the next time things potentially get hard again. So.
Yeah, again, that sort of setting priorities and where are the resources being applied. So Ricardo, you had a response or a comment?
Well, Leticia, I saw your hand go up though, so I want to give you the space.
Oh, thank you. Well, I just wanted to share a story that might not be unique to me, but for years on my magnet board in the kitchen, I had a police officer's business card, and it was probably like in 2005. A gentleman knocked at my door, and I thought, oh my God, what happened? And it wasn't anything that happened. He just wanted to meet me. He wanted to ask how I was doing and share his business card. And, you know, I think I called it one time when I needed advice on graffiti, and I got a hotline, and I learned that you really should report graffiti, because sometimes graffiti is code messages for criminals to talk to each other. I mean, it was just like this completely wonderful community building thing that happened. And I think in one of the, you know, clean outs, I got rid of it, but I held it in my hand good and long, and I recycled it. And I remember thinking how sad I felt that that was so far in the past. And although things are really kind of messed up right now, Jenni, you know, what you're talking about, hoping for things to get back to where they are, it's going to get back to where they are starting here. And we have to, you know, put one foot in front of the other and actually do these things, write the letters, name the programs that we want to support, ask for funding for more police officers, and, you know, keep the momentum going, because this infrastructure is going to take a while. It's not an overnight fix. I'm kind of going all over the place because it's getting late, and I think my brain's starting to give out on me a little bit, but I just wanted to share that, you know, that business card, to me is a symbol of hope that we should cling to, because we can get back to that if we act, so that's all I want to say.
Yeah, I think that there's a theme here of that relationship between the community and the police, that we actually have a relationship and we know each other, and is very important. So Ricardo, you had a comment, and then there have been questions from Bing and Midge about gun violence, and then we got 6 minutes left. So Ricardo, why don't you go ahead, and then Bing and Midge.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, but Leticia, to the last point, I think part of our goal as well is maybe not going back to how things were, but being better. Because again, if we go back and talk about even 5 years ago, we again enjoyed the benefit of being one of the safest cities, largest cities in the nation. We still in that time did not have the infrastructure to meet the demand of what we're seeing today. So it really is about building that ecosystem and asking us two questions. How big is the pot of resources to that ecosystem? And then how intimate are we within each line item for those funds, within each of those kind of pillars in that ecosystem? How intimate can we be so that we are focusing those dollars on community policing, right? On the right officers being able to do the right work, and all those things that need to happen, right? All the things that the city of Portland has been asking us to do. I did have one question to your earlier comment, Leticia, about police reports, and Commander Hurley or AC Austin Cop, I'm wondering if you can shed a little bit more light about the police report aspect, about because I've heard this actually by multiple Portlanders as well, about calling the cops and then them getting a response of like, we can't take a police report. Can you shed a little bit of light on that as well? I'm a little puzzled by that.
So it's not an issue of not being able to take a police report. There's a few different things. One, sometimes there's no time, right? So it could be 8, 10, 12 hours before an officer can actually show up to take said report. The low level reports like your stolen cars and those things, when there's no suspect information, we need people from the community to go online and fill those reports out, or wait for a PS3, which is only on day shift. Because those are things that when we're dealing with the shootings and the high priority calls that are like safety calls, we don't have an officer to go to those. That is just how it is, right? And so that's a huge difference for the city of Portland. The city of Portland has always had the understanding that when they call 911 or BOEC, even on non-emergency, a police officer shows up to take those reports, and that has changed. And so it's hard for us to get that information out to the community so they understand that it's just a staffing issue. It's not the inability to take a report. However, one of the things I've had several discussions about recently is taking reports on things like stolen cars. There are rules around taking a report of a stolen car. If you are not the registered owner of that car and you can't prove the car belongs to you, I can't take a stolen report for it. And those are state rules. They're not Portland Police Bureau rules. And so sometimes people who haven't registered the car that they bought, they don't have any paperwork that says that they bought said car, or they loaned it to somebody and then that person just refused to bring it back, doesn't mean a stolen car. So we're not allowed to actually take that report and put it in LEDs. And I know that's frustrating for people, especially the number of stolen cars that we have right now. People don't understand that there's a paperwork process that we have to show they're legally the owner of that car. The other reports we do take, it's just that sometimes they take days for us to get to them. The other piece too is we don't have records staff right now. Our records division is very low. So even if they go online and they fill out the report that they needed to do, records has to put it into the system before they can get a copy of it for things like insurance claims and other things that they need that report for. Last I checked, we were over 1,000 reports behind on that for records to be able to put it in. So now you're talking weeks and weeks before that report actually shows up for somebody to actually get a copy of it for the insurance company and to follow through. So then people are calling saying they told me they took a report and they didn't. Well, they actually did take a report, right? Whether that was on the phone or whatever, but it hasn't gotten through the record system yet because of staffing in the records division, non-sworn staffing. And so they can't actually get a copy of that. And that's hard for people to understand just kind of how the process of that works. All of our injured officers that cannot be on the street because of injuries, are taking those ones and trying to get that process completed and approved so that they can get them through. But that it takes time just because of the amount of calls that are coming in.
Yeah, so that's helpful for people to know, because I know there's a lot of community frustration about that, reporting of calls. So we've got 2 minutes left. Is there an easy answer to can we declare a gun violence emergency, as leaders of Black community members suggested last night? I think Midge, that was your question. Is declaring a gun violence emergency?
I just really just to answer that really quick, we have a FitCog, we have a community oversight group that works with the FIT team, and they kind of drive their work. And so if you want to have discussions about declaring a gun violence emergency, I almost want to say that the city has pretty much already done that with creating the FIT team and community groups that are there. And then of course the community oversight group, and that group would be happy to talk to anybody and discuss the emergency that is gun violence.
Okay.
And it is a community group.
Okay, well, we got 1 minute left, so I want to just thank all of our presenters, Jenni, Leticia, Assistant Chief Austin Kopp, and Commander Hurley. Thank you so much, you guys. Ricardo, thank you so much for not only showing up, but then participating so wonderfully. We want to thank the Western Seminary and Bonnie and Sean for co-hosting with us, and we really appreciate that. And a big thanks to Midge Pierce, who did a tremendous amount of work and organizing to make this happen. So Midge, thank you so much for that. And thank you to all of you, our neighbors and community members who are willing to spend time to try to work on these issues. I think having Roger Jones here and Bill from the business district, HBBA, we all need to work together. That's what's going to get our voice amplified and elevated, but also that it's informed engagement where we're learning what is it we should be asking for, what are the challenges, what are the obstacles, so we can be more politically effective, as Leticia has guided us. So we are right at 9 o'clock. So thank you all for this wonderful discussion tonight. And we will be sharing the recording, and hopefully we will have future conversations like this to move this all forward. So thank you all for coming tonight.
Bye, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there.
Bye. So Sean, we can stop recording. I think we got it.
All right, I'm stopping now.